Good morning and welcome. This is our last philosopher. We'll spend a few class periods on this to work our way through the inquiry, and we will read the majority of it, maybe even all of it, I'm not sure. Nonetheless, David Hume is our last philosopher, and today we're going to introduce Hume and do sections 2 and 3 of the inquiry. Okay, let me go ahead and see here. There we go. All right. David Hume was born in 1711. He died in 1776. He is a product of what is known as the Scottish Enlightenment, along with his friend Adam Smith, who wrote The Wealth of Nations. Hume seemed destined for a legal career, coming from a long tradition of such folks, but he found it to be rather distasteful, perhaps much to his credit, and instead found himself rather eaten up with philosophy and general learning. And by the time he finished his studies, he had lost his religious convictions of his Calvinist upbringing, and he was much more interested in the classical pagan writings than in the Christian ones. This change was difficult for him. It obviously had a profound effect on him, because by the time he was 18 years old, at a young age, his philosophical explorations had gotten to him and eaten him up until to the point of making him ill. And by the age of 23, he was profoundly depressed. He left his philosophical studies behind and went to work in the real world, but that didn't last because that sucked too. He quit work and went to France in 1734 to study literature. Sounds like a good move to me. And in 1739, he actually published his first big philosophical work, The Treatise on Human Nature, which is a much larger version of the book that we're reading, The Inquiry. Okay, but when he published it, he edited out some of the more heretical atheistic sections. They were removed. The book, though, was published and it flopped. Okay, he continued. He said it was dead off the presses, right? It didn't work. He continued with some more popular writings, and in 1748, almost a decade later, he published The Inquiry, which we are reading. It's essentially a revision of the treatise given in more popular form, one that's more accessible, as it were. Okay, it was better received, and still not a hit, and many of those who read it did so with great distaste, as you'll find out why coming up here. In 1754, he published the History of England, which you can still find in our library here, and this was much more popular. It's a pretty good book there, apparently. Hume himself was rather fat and clumsy. He was known to be a chef, quite a cook and all that. But nonetheless, he had a reputation of being very popular with the ladies, and he never married. Okay. In 1775, he became ill with cancer, and reportedly, even though he didn't believe in any life after death, he was very calm in the face of his own death. While he was sick, he asked Adam Smith, his friend, to publish his dialogues on natural religion after his death. Adam Smith didn't do it. Apparently, I wonder if it was because of how heretical it was. Hume's nephew published the work in 1779, and it was probably best published posthumously because the work is a rather devastating critique of natural religion. A friend of mine who is a fellow of the cloth, he told me that every religious person should read Hume's dialogues at least once every 2 or 3 years, just to keep you honest. That might be sound advice. Okay. There are 2 complementary ways that scholars have interpreted Hume. First of all, he is and is seen as an epistemological skeptic. That is, he accepts the empiricist principles inherent in Locke and Berkeley and finally carries them to their logical conclusion, skepticism. Okay? Hume essentially takes Berkeley's critique of substance and shows how it also applies to causality, mind, God, and other metaphysical ideas. If you can't know substance, you can't know those either. Okay? The second way Hume is interpreted is as a naturalist. That is, he wants to show how certain beliefs arise naturally and inevitably in response to the regular features of our experience. Our belief in metaphysical things, mind, substance, causality, and the like, is prompted by the non-rational aspects of our nature. Okay? This is Hume's psychology. These ideas are the natural result of our psychological makeup rather than anything metaphysical. In terms of Hume's skepticism, we can say that these things might be true of the world, but we really can't know them. All we can do is give an account of how we come to believe them. Notice, there's a very strong anti-rationalism working here. Hume is thoroughly anti-rationalistic, pointing out that many or even most of our fundamental beliefs are grounded in the passions and emotions rather than in reason. Hume notes that, very famous quotation from Hume, reason is and ought only to be a slave of the passions. For Hume, in other words, believing is more like feeling than the rationalist would ever admit. The relationship between Hume's skepticism and his empiricism, then, is this. He emphasizes the non-rational side or feeling side of our nature by arguing for skepticism. He claims, that is, that certain beliefs cannot be justified by appealing to reason alone, as a rationalist would say, or even by an appeal to pure experience, by appealing to experience, as Locke would say. Okay? You cannot justify your belief in the future, or even the unperceived milk in the refrigerator, okay, by an appeal to reason. Reason is not the foundation of our beliefs, but rather our passional and non-rational psychological natures are. Okay? So what he does then is he undermines rationalism with skepticism and replaces it with naturalism. So Hume starts with a desire to clear the field. In doing this, we're going to spend most of our time, and over the next little while today, on about 3 pages of the text in section 2. We're pretty much going to ignore most of section 1, but I do want to look at the last paragraph of it to set the stage. That is his project right here on this slide. But, as after all, the abstractedness of these speculations is no recommendation, but rather a disadvantage to them. And as this difficulty may perhaps be surmounted by care and art, and the avoiding of all necessary detail, we have, in the following inquiry, attempted to throw some light upon subjects from which uncertainty has hitherto deterred the wise, and obscurity the ignorant. Happy if we can unite the boundaries of the different species of philosophy by reconciling profound inquiry with clearness and truth with novelty. And still more happy if, reasoning in this easy manner, we can undermine the foundations of an abstruse philosophy, which seems to have hitherto served only as a shelter to superstition and to cover absurdity and error. So he's wanting to clear the field. There you go. All right. To begin, Hume, as you may have noticed, or you will by now, assumes the basics of the empiricist position. Okay? All ideas come from experience. We perceive only our own ideas. Knowledge consists in perceiving ideas, and we can have no a priori knowledge of the world. Okay? Hume is very epistemologically oriented. In fact, he is so epistemologically oriented that he precludes metaphysics. It's impossible. Human knowledge is simply too limited to have knowledge of such metaphysical things. We can't get there, and we'll find out how we come to actually believe those things, we hope. Okay? Hume's starting point. He starts with the question, what's the mind? He assumes, of course, that the mind is the center of knowledge, possibly a safe assumption. So what are the contents of the mind? His answer, perception is what we call these things. This covers everything that's in the mind. If it's in the mind, it's perception. Okay? Now, we're going to start by going ahead and going to the text, and we're going to look at a few paragraphs here from section 2, page 584. This is where Hume sort of lays out the framework what's going to inform the rest of his empiricism. From the top. Everyone will readily allow that there's a considerable difference between the perceptions of the mind when a man feels the pain of excessive heat or the pleasure of moderate warmth, and when he afterwards recalls to his memory this sensation or anticipates it by his imagination. These faculties may mimic or copy the perceptions of the senses, but they can never entirely reach the force and vivacity of the original sentiment. The utmost we say of them, even when they operate with greatest vigor, is that they represent their object in so lively a manner that we could almost say we feel or see it. But unless the mind is so disordered by disease or madness, they never can arrive at a pitch of vivacity so as to render these perceptions altogether indistinguishable. All the colors of poetry, however splendid, can never paint the natural objects in such a manner as to make the description be taken for a real landscape. The most lively thought is still inferior to the dullest sensation. Okay, so he's making this is the initial sort of lightly made distinction between experiences, the actual experiences, and the remembering or thinking about them. We may observe a like distinction to run through all the other perceptions of the mind. A man in a fit of anger is actuated in a very different manner from one who only thinks of that emotion. Now, you may remember getting mad, then you may get mad, but then that's a different thing altogether. Then you're mad, right? If you tell me that any person is in love, I easily understand your meaning and form a just conception of his situation, but can never mistake that conception for the real disorders and agitations of the passions. I like that. Love is disordering and agitating. When we reflect on our past sentiments and affections, our thought is a faithful mirror and copies its objects truly. That's a big hint right there. But the colors which it employs are faint and dull in comparison with those in which our original perceptions were clothed. It requires no nice discernment or metaphysical head to mark the distinction between them, between the experiences and the remembering or thinking about them. Okay? Now here he comes. Here's going to make his technical distinction here in this third paragraph. Here, therefore, we may divide all the perceptions of the mind into two classes or species, which are distinguished by their different degrees of force and vivacity. The less forcible and lively are commonly denominated thoughts or ideas. He will from henceforth call them ideas. The other species want to name in our language, and most others I suspect because it's not requisite for any but philosophical persons to rank them under a general term or appellation. So he's trying to come up with his name here. Let us therefore use a little freedom and call them impressions, employing that word in a somewhat different from the usual. With the term impression, then, I mean all our more lively perceptions when we see or hear or feel or love or hate or desire or will. And impressions are distinguished from ideas, which are the less lively perceptions from which we are conscious when we reflect on any of these sensations or movements above mentioned. Okay? Now, so perceptions then are of two varieties, as we just saw. Okay? There are impressions and ideas. Impressions are the actual experiences we have, right? Right there, the actual experiences that we have. And the remembering or thinking about those experiences, that's ideas. Impression, actual experience, ideas, the remembering or thinking about them. Okay? Now, Hume offers us what we'll call the principle of differentiation, or how to tell them apart, right? Impressions and ideas, he says, they're actually kind of alike because they're both in the mind and they're both parts of experience. In thinking about that pain that I had, remember the worst pain you've ever had. You can almost bring it back, but not quite like it did at the moment you felt it. Okay? A few years ago, watching the NCAA basketball tournament, which I sorely missed this year. Excuse me. I was watching the game when Kevin Ware broke his ankle foot down there. It's awful. Ouch. Okay. You know, when when he goes back and watches that, he still can't remember that the way it felt in that moment. Okay? Ouch. And neither can you, by the way. I mean, I looked at it and said, ouch, that hurts. But it didn't hurt me near like it did him. And even he, when he thinks about it, he can't quite get to that degree of intensity of that original experience. Okay? So, they're kind of alike. We can almost feel it, but not quite. The difference between them is that ideas are weaker, impressions are strong, lively, forceful, and vivacious. Okay? Ideas are less so. Those are Hume's words, lively, forceful, and vivacious. That's how you tell them apart. And an idea can never reach the full pitch of vivacity and liveliness of an impression. Okay? Now, so, that's clear, right? Now let's talk about the relationship between the two. This is what we're going to call the copy thesis. Okay? This is the central notion, by the way, of Hume's empiricism. Here we go. An idea is a copy of impressions. By the way, without this copying, there would be no mind. Ideas are necessary for the existence of the mind, but they're all copies of impressions. Okay? This copying takes place, again, automatically. Okay? Without impressions, there can be no ideas. And for Hume, there is a one-to-one correspondence between ideas and impression. There can be no idea that doesn't come from some corresponding impression, supposedly. Okay? Now, he further divides ideas up into two varieties, simple or compound. Every simple idea is a direct copy of an impression. This is going to be important coming up. Okay? Now, normally we have compound ideas, but these are made up of simple ideas. And note that the compounding process in sense perception is automatic. It's done by the mind. Okay? And it's not something that we do consciously. It's automatic. Also, we also have two kinds of impressions, inner and outer. Inner impressions are things like emotions, feelings, and such that come from the inside. Outer impressions are impressions of sense or from sense experience. Okay? Now, we're going to skip one paragraph there, and the second paragraph, that middle paragraph on the second column on 585. But though our thought seems to possess this unbounded liberty, we shall find upon a nearer examination that it's really confined within very narrow limits, that all this creative power of the mind amounts to nothing more than the faculty of compounding, transposing, augmenting, or diminishing the materials afforded to us by sense and experience. Okay, so the mind is limited to the tools it has to work with, and those are supplied by impressions. When we think of a golden mountain, we join two consistent ideas, gold and mountain, with which we were formerly acquainted. A virtuous horse we can conceive, because from our own feeling we can conceive virtue, and this we may unite to the figure and shape of a horse, which is an animal familiar to us. In short, all the materials of thinking are derived either from outward or inward sentiment, outer inner impressions. He uses impressions and sentiment interchangeably there. The mixture and composition of these belong alone to the mind and the will. Or, to express myself in more philosophical language, all our ideas or more feeble perceptions are copies of our impressions or more lively ones. There is your copy thesis. Okay? So this leads us to a corollary to the copy thesis. Simple. No impressions, no ideas. If you've never felt anger, you wouldn't have any idea of anger. Okay, I mean, if somehow you were born with this uber peaceful disposition, you were raised in an uber peaceful home so that you actually never got angry. Imagine that. Not gonna happen, still. And so you move off to college for the first time, and you're hanging out on the academic quad down the row, and you see these two boys about to bow up on one another, and they're just livid. They're mad. You're like, what is that? Had you never had that inward sentiment, you wouldn't have any idea of it. Or, how about this, an actual true story. When I was a very fortunate young kid. I was probably almost an early teenager before I had my first headache. I'm not kidding. I remember my mom, when I was like in my early 5, 6, 7 years old. She would say, "I have a splitting headache." I remember very, very distinctly many times asking her, "Mom, what's that? What is it? Is it like that in your head?" No, can't. And she couldn't convey. She tried to convey to me what a headache is like. But unless you had it, guess what? You can't know it. When I got my first, it was like, oh, there it is. I wish I didn't. But, there you go. No impressions, no ideas. This is true of all ideas. Exhaustive of all ideas. Okay? So, the copy thesis, that's the first core of Hume's empiricism. The second major core, and this is a big one, the meaning thesis. The meaning of an idea is the copy, is or are the impressions that it copies. Okay? To analyze an idea, for example, to get at what Brown means, what you have to do is trace it back to the impression that it copies. Okay? There it is right there. Brown. Right there. Okay? That's all the meaning there is. That's all. If you trace the idea back to its original impression, and that's where you get to the meaning. Okay? Now, to look at this one, we're going to skip forward just a little bit. 586, 587, the last paragraph of that section. Here, therefore, is a proposition which not only seems in itself simple and intelligible, but if proper use were made of it, might render every dispute equally intelligible, and banish all that jargon which has so long taken possession of metaphysical reasoning and drawn great disgrace upon them. All ideas, especially abstract ones, are naturally faint and obscure. The mind has but a slender hold of them. They are apt to be confounded with other resembling ideas, and we have often employed any term, though without a distinct meaning. We're apt to imagine that it has a determinate idea annexed to it. On the contrary, all impressions, that is, all sensations, either outward or inward, that's inner and outer impressions, okay, are strong and vivid. The limits between them are more exactly determined, nor is it easy to fall into any error or mistake with regard to them. We entertain, therefore, any suspicion that a philosophical term is employed without any meaning or idea, as is all too frequent, attached to it. We need to inquire, from what impression is that supposed idea derived? And if it is impossible to assign any, this will serve to confirm our suspicion. By bringing ideas into so clear a light, we may reasonably hope to remove all dispute which may arise concerning their nature and reality. Okay. Notice this, y'all. Metaphysics is blown. Try to give an empiricist analysis of these metaphysical ideas. Substance, cause and effect, God. Where's the original impression? Can you find God in sense experience? Can you find cause and effect? We're going to talk about that next time. Hang on right there. Don't go there yet. Or substance. You never, ever, ever experience substance. Remember Berkeley? It's not among the attributes. You never experience it, right? Okay. The meaning thesis. That's the second major core of Hume's empiricism. Okay. Now, we're going to back up a page and go back to Hume's argument for the copy thesis. His first argument is more of a challenge, right? And let's look at this, the first argument. We're going to look at this. This goes from 539 on to 40. I'm sorry, 585 to 86. Sorry, that was the old edition. 585, 186. To prove this, the first two following arguments will, I hope, be sufficient. First, when we analyze thoughts or ideas, however compounded or sublime, we always find they resolve themselves into simple ideas which were copied from a preceding fashion, feeling, or sentiment. Even those ideas which at first view seem the most wide of this origin are found upon a nearer scrutiny to be derived from it. Check this out. The idea of God, as meaning an infinitely intelligent, wise, and good being, arises from reflecting on the operations of our own mind and augmenting without limit those qualities of goodness and wisdom. Take that, Descartes. We may prosecute this inquiry to what length we please. We shall always find that every idea which we examine is copied from a similar impression. Those who assert this position are not universally true, nor without exception, keep that in mind, have only one method, and easy one at that, of refuting it by producing that idea which in their opinion is not derived from the source. It will then be incumbent upon us to produce the impression or lively perception which corresponds to it. So this one is more of a challenge, right? Show me one. Show me any idea which I cannot trace back to an impression, and then you will have proved me wrong. Okay? That's the first argument. The second argument, that next part, we're not read that one. This is the idea that the person who's blind from birth would have no idea of color. Try to explain red to someone who has never experienced it. That would be difficult. No, that would be pretty much impossible. Okay? So notice this. There is no idea of color for those who have never seen color. Okay? Now, Hume offers one exception. Okay? This is the famous missing color example. Check out this diagram right here. The way we conceive this is that the first patch of blue, let's call that B1. The next patch is B plus 1, that is plus 1 drop of white. The next is B plus 2, then B plus 3 isn't there. So the next was B plus 4, B plus 5, B plus 6. So we add that would be making it darker. That would be this one, B plus 1 plus 2 plus, that would be from right to left there. Okay? To make it lighter as we go along. Always do that just the opposite when I draw this one on the board. Okay? Nonetheless, you see the example right there. So that missing shade right there, that middle one, let's say that blue is one that you have never seen. Could you, in your mind, see that missing color if you had never had the impression of it before? Okay? Hume says you can. Hume says you can. Let me make this very clear. Each shade of blue is its own color. So each one is a simple idea. Okay? In which case, Hume has given us a way that the mind can come up with a simple idea for which it has never had an impression. Okay? Hume says we can. Should he have said that? Can you? Is this a problem for Hume? By the way, this is going to be what your writing is going to be about when we finish this. Okay? Let's look at how Hume dismisses this. This is in the last full paragraph on 586 for that the penultimate paragraph in that section. Okay? The last few lines of that. Now I ask whether it's possible for him, for his own imagination, to supply this deficiency and raise up to himself the idea of that particular shade, though it had never been conveyed to him by the senses. Okay, that's what we're saying right here. I believe that there are few who will be of the opinion that he can. And this may serve as proof that simple ideas are not always, in every instance, derived from the corresponding impressions, though this instance is so singular that it's scarcely worth our observing and does not merit that for it alone we should alter our general maxim. Really? Stop it, Hume. He just told us 2 paragraphs before this. There's one easy way to refute his thesis, and that is to show the impression that does not come from the original, from the idea that doesn't come from the original impression. Then he does it and then says, maybe not. Blow it off. We'll see. I say to that, arg. Okay. I'm going to let you guys think about this, and we'll probably discuss it in our team meeting. So this is the first section, And it is big. It's large. This is the core of Hume's empiricism. But we're not quite finished yet. We need to do that next section, a brief one of the association of ideas. Okay? So notice this. According to Hume's empiricism, you have impressions. These are copied into ideas, but then these ideas are associated. That is, the mind organizes the world. Think about that. The mind organizes the world. And there are three principles upon which ideas are associated. Resemblance, contiguity in space and time, and cause and effect. Now, without a lot of argument, he claims that these are exhaustive, that this is enough for us to construct the world, for the mind to construct the world. And we'll talk about this too in our session. Okay? Now, let's talk about that assignment. I mentioned this already. I want you to puzzle about this missing color example. If Hume is right, if we could supply that color, this is a problem for Hume. Is he right? He says we could. Could we supply the missing shade of blue if truly we've never seen it? And if we can, doesn't this provide a significant exception to Hume's empiricism? Maybe he should have said that we can't do it. I don't know. Can you? See you next time.